I'm Mike DeLuca. Welcome to this rare In the Trenches look at the craft of screenwriting. Today I'm joined by David Seltzer, who's penned the screenplays for Table for Five, Bird on a Wire, and Dragonfly. He wrote and directed the films Lucas, Punchline, Shining Through, and Nobody's Baby, and famously wrote the best-selling novel and the screenplay for The Omen. He was also the recipient for the Academy Award for the documentary The Hellstrom Chronicles. Thank you for being here, David.
Thank you.
Is it true you got your start with National Geographic, traveling around with Jacques Cousteau?
That's true. Tromped around the world, and spent a lot of time in Africa mostly.
Now, in what capacity were you working with Mr. Cousteau?
He needed to have an American representative in order to satisfy the union requirements and have a series on the air. And he probably thought I was the least offensive of a small group that were presented to him. I actually did a lot of the writing for the shows. And I did a lot of the research, and I went on a lot of shoots with them and did a lot of diving.
What was that like? Was it wonderful?
It was unbelievable. He was a magician. I mean, he was not a man who had an encyclopedic knowledge of what's in the water. But he said, you hire people for this. I don't need to know these things. But I really had to make sense out of a lot of the experiments he did. For instance, he put a big plastic bubble down at the bottom of a coral reef and put some small fish in it. And before long, sure enough, there were big fish coming and biting at it. And he was looking at the footage. He said, "Oh, fantastique, incroyable." And I said, "Well, what does it mean?" He says, "The big fish are hungry." So I had to make up some lines. I said, only through experiments such as this will we, be able to trace our own ancestry and the blah, blah, blah of man.
Oh, you brought a lot to it.
Yeah, I did.
Do you think that Cousteau documentary training kind of helped you develop what we think is a naturalistic style of writing?
The documentaries in general did, because what I learned was that nothing ever looked fake. Nothing ever sounded fake. If you covered it close, covered it side, panned over, did a wide shot, it would always look authentic because it was. And as I wrote and as I directed, I realized that if I walked in the room and heard people saying these things and moving in this way, then I was ready to shoot.
And you also worked in game shows?
I did. I started out in game shows.
Which ones? And tell me the good stories.
I'm going to date myself, and that's a bad thing in Hollywood.
I'm dating myself right now.
Okay.
It's a wonderful relationship.
The I've Got a Secret show, primarily. It was my first job out of college. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I knew something in the entertainment business. But again, what it taught me was I worked at the I've Got a Secret show. Gary Moore, who was the master of ceremonies, sat there, and somebody I would find. It was my job to pick these guys out of the mail, the newspapers, who had done weird things, really weird things. People would, and they would whisper it, and it would be supered on the screen. A panel of celebrities then would try to guess what the secret is. And, the necklace I'm wearing is made out of my gallstones. I'm carrying George Burns' grandchildren's foreskin in my pocket. I pushed a peanut up Pike's Peak with my nose. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And what I realized is there's no such thing as fiction. Whatever you can think of, you will find somebody who did it. So it gave me great license to play with events and people.
And how did the Hellstrom Chronicle help your career?
A lot, because I wrote dialogue for the first time. It was a show about insects inheriting the earth, which may be closer than we think now. And was done with a new kind of camera lens so that you really could score it. You could score it, ants coming over the hill. You could score it with a war kind of theme. But we didn't know what to do with all this footage. It had just come back from Africa. We had no idea. So I hired my college roommate. His name is Larry Pressman. He's still an actor. And we pretended his name was Dr. Hellstrom. And he would appear on camera and give credence and philosophy to what was going on. And so I wrote, he spoke to the camera. And when I was done, I thought, I think people get rich doing this. Goodbye,
Not
documentaries.
Really, by the way. But go ahead.
Richer than I was. I was really scraping by. I had 2 kids, and they're about to take one of my cars away from me. So I thought, gee, I better start writing more of Dr. Hellstrom's dialogue and other people's. So I started telling people that I was a screenwriter. I had never written a screenplay, and somebody believed me along the way.
Thus a career is born. What part did you play in the original Willy Wonka adaptation?
My boss, David Wolper, and one of the documentary directors I worked with, Mel Stewart, were trying to get out of documentaries too. It was their first opportunity. Wolper had never produced one, Mel had never directed one, I had certainly never written one, and wasn't about to, but Roald Dahl had showed up on the set in Munich with 14 pages and said it was a screenplay. When they said, that's not enough pages, he said, well then read the book. They got into a fight. He stormed off the set thinking they would shut down. But Wolper called me and said, can you really write a screenplay? Because we've got a problem here. And he did not want to admit to the community at that point that he had lost Roald Dahl. That really was his credibility in making a feature.
Was the book at the time very revered, or did that come later?
Absolutely. Yeah, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was known by all kids and all families. So what we did was beef up Willy Wonka, so it became Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And I came to Munich. I think some of the musical numbers were already in progress and had to start piecing together a screenplay. I'm surprised that it came out the way it did because I had no clue what I was doing. But I had to write intros for musical numbers that were already being done and outros for those musical numbers. And it was a baptism by fire. David Wolper said, you can't get your name on the screen, but what I will do is produce your first screenplay, which he did.
What was the biggest challenge, would you say, in adapting that book?
Writing on a German typewriter. That was the biggest challenge. In adapting the book, it was a very episodic book, as was the movie. There was really no structure. It taught me a lot about structure, actually. But I realized there was no threat. There was no conflict. There was just going from one place to the other, this sort of mad, adorable scientist. And so I invented a character to whisper into the kid's ear. We called him Slugworth. That was not in the book. And I didn't know what Slugworth was going to say in the end. I just knew we needed a threat of some kind. And it worked out very well what he had to say, because that really was very much part of the test of the kids. So that was my contribution. And
how did you know, without having worked on a lot of screenplays before, how did you just know that it needed a structural through line? Because it was an ingenious invention. I mean, it's what you do remember it as the clothesline of the movie.
I don't know. I think people have instinctive sense. There is no such thing as structure, to tell you the truth. There are not 3 acts to a screenplay. It's like how many pieces are in a pizza. It's just what you have to do is if something's getting boring, you have to figure out why and make it not.
What will make it satisfying?
Yeah, because lots of times the scene that you will say ends Act 1 and starts Act 2, I say, what happens if it gets cut out of the movie? Then where's the act break? Nobody knows. So you don't need to have everybody say, let's run away from the villain now. At any rate, the episodic nature of Willy Wonka just worked. But I had a feeling that it would become very pale if there wasn't some tension. It was getting boring. So that was just an instinct.
So it was just the necessity of that invention kind of hit you. Now, what was the closing line of the movie?
The book ended with them flying up in the air and saying, yippee, Willy Wonka and Charlie, who had finally won the entire factory. And I had finished my work in Munich. I'd gone on vacation. I'd been up for 20-hour days for a month. I was completely wiped out. And I have a log cabin that has one telephone and it's tacked to a tree. That was at that time. And whoever was nearest would row in or walk in, pick it up, and take a message. At any rate, it started ringing. I was about to go out fishing, fly fishing. And it was Mel Stewart from Munich. And they had everybody on the set. And he was refusing to do that last line. He said, what? You got to come up with the last line. I said, well, how much time do I have? He said, you have no time. The clock is ticking. We have to be out of here tomorrow. So I was stuck. This was a real test. And I thought, well, this is a children's fable. How do they end? They end with they all lived happily ever after. But that's not good enough. And that's all I could think of. I said, well, got on the phone, said, Mel, this is really lame. But how about this? They go up into their spacecraft looking down on the chocolate factory. And Willy Wonka is telling Charlie all the wonderful things he's going to have. And he looks at him very seriously and says, but Charlie, do you know what happened to the man who got everything he always wanted? And Charlie fearfully says, what? And he says, he lived happily ever after. And it was really suited the simplicity
well, the optimism of it, too, is
yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. So, at any rate, that was a story that everybody who works on the movie tells.
What was your thinking for the tone of the film? Because did you set out to do something as macabre as that tunnel set piece, or did that come more from the production side of things?
I never thought anything in it was macabre. I mean, it did turn out. Gene has a real talent for being lovable and frightening at the same time. So I thought I was playing to his lovable side. I had no idea he was going to widen his eyes and go into sort of a trance with it. I just thought the words were funny enough and the poetry was backward enough so that it would be funny. No, I had no idea. That was an interpretation of it.
Is there anything from that screenplay that you're particularly proud of? Although it could be that closing line.
I think it's that closing line. And I have to reiterate that I was following the lines of a really, really brilliant writer's book.
Right.
That was not my source material.
When you saw the final product, what did you think of it?
Hadn't a clue. I had not a clue if it worked at all.
Did you like it?
Too self-conscious. Anything I do, I have to see it at least 2 times before I can actually see it. So I just walked out of there in a daze. I saw a screening in the middle of an afternoon. And it wasn't, by the way, all that successful when it was released. It,
had a life after, yeah. Do you still find that you're very close to the things you work on, so it's hard to look at them objectively after you complete a film?
I'm not close to them emotionally, but it's hard to look at them because I always find that they're not nearly as good as I thought they were at the time.
Did Wonka give you a big career push?
It really didn't. I floundered for a while until The Omen came along.
How did you come up with the idea for The Omen? What's the story behind that?
Well, in a personal way, necessity. Because I was really broke. And I needed $7,500 to keep my cars. And believe it or not, that's kind of what I got. But I had a rule coming out of documentaries that I wouldn't do anything I couldn't learn from. That's still my criteria. Because when you do documentaries, you become an expert on something each time, a different subject. So when I took, I think maybe I had done The Other Side of the Mountain, the story of that skier who broke her back. And I got a chance to learn all about skiing, something I didn't know about and to ski. And I thought when it was proposed to me that I write something about the devil, because The Exorcist had come out and done so well.
Now, who proposed it?
Harvey Bernhardt. He had seen The Exorcist. He wanted something like that. And I said, I don't do things like that. And he said, well, you better think it over.
And Harvey Bernhardt, for the uninitiated, was who?
Harvey Bernhardt was the executive producer, and I have to credit him with realizing the marketplace could stand another one of those right away. So I thought about it, and I thought, I can't learn anything about this. And then I realized I had never opened a Bible. And I started reading the Bible. And I'm still a huge fan of the Bible. To me, it's like Shakespeare. I love reading it out loud. I love the mythology. I love the characters. And I found something in it that the beast would rise from the eternal sea. And I had all these interpretive texts. And one of the texts said the eternal sea has been interpreted as the world of revolution, the world of political turmoil. So, okay, he rises from a political family. And then I found the sign of the beast is 666. It was not a calendar date. But I thought with being born into a political family on 666, that what I said was June 6th, 6 a.m., because we didn't have another 6 to deal with at that time. Right. But it was released in June 6, 1976. I was off and running. I had a thrilling premise of, one of these very blessed families having some serious evil growing in their midst that would eventually be the most evil thing in the world. And an innocent evil. It had an innocent villain, which was just a remarkable stroke of luck, because I had no idea how well that was going to work. Made it poignant and scary, and the kid was great.
What point in the development process did you know it was working, or you were going to have something that really worked out of it?
When I got a call from people saying superlatively wonderful things. Otherwise, I didn't know exactly what I had done. It was too early on.
Now, you were already a screenwriter. How did you come to write that as a novel?
Eric Siegel had done Love Story while it was in production. It was a huge success.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was the first novelization of a film. And I realized when I went to London a couple of times watching the filming, when I saw the decapitation, this was a while ago. One was not accustomed to seeing something like that on the screen.
I remember it in a theater when it opened, shocking. I mean, it was just a shocking moment because then it was like very graphic, but very well executed.
Yeah, very well executed.
And you liked that character so much, so it was a combination of being sad about it, but being shocked by it.
It was something spectacular for its day, and I thought, this movie is going to be a hit. I'm going to go home and write a novel. So I did, and very quickly, and I beat the opening date of the movie by a couple of weeks. The novel became a bestseller right away. And it spawned a whole kind of side business in the film business. There were departments now for novelizations, and head of those departments, and it truly never worked again. It was Eric Siegel's book and mine.
What's your process for writing scary or creepy scenes and accompanying dialogue? What scares you, and how do you get that on the page?
I think everything's scary, to tell you the truth. If you turn down the lights and play the right music and put the right shadows in there. I like to take very common things. Such as in the Omen, it looked like everything was just a coincidence. Unless there were so many of these, there was a critical mass of these coincidences that made you realize something is off here. And I feel that way about my life lots of times.
Did the ending change over time, or did you always have that ending?
I always had the ending, but not the smile. It ended up with the kid having been triumphant. There was a funeral scene, and I thought you would think it would be the Gregory Peck character, or the mother who had died earlier, and the kid who Gregory Peck had killed. Turned out to be the mother and father, and in fact, the kid did step up to the legacy of being now in the first family of the United States. But Dick Donner said, turn around, smile at me. And he actually said, no, you got to smile better than that, Harvey. You got to smile better than that. Smile like you're mean. Smile. And Harvey couldn't do it. And to tell you, he said something kind of foul in a babyish way, something about squishy farts. And the kid, that's what he was doing when he looked at the camera. And it just played like gangbusters. There was some debate as to whether or not it would be too frightening for evil to triumph.
So was it ever debated on the level of like, can we have this kind of open ending? Or that wasn't really the problem, it was evil winning? It
was can evil win? And I thought in the form of a little kid who didn't really know who he was, evil could win.
And were you prepared for what a blockbuster that became?
No. And I really put my head in the sand. I turned down doing a sequel. I didn't want to do a sequel because I wouldn't learn anything. What I learned was I could have gotten rich.
Wow.
But I didn't do it. And I still don't do sequels. The Other Side of the Mountain had a sequel. A bunch of sequels were spawned because what they had was the running promise that the devil could wind up in the White House. Hello.
It was ahead of its time, I guess, as a premise.
Yes.
Do you feel like sequel mania has kind of corrupted the system more now than before, or do you think it was always there?
I think creatively, the business in general has become creatively impoverished. There's no reason whatsoever to look at old movies and remake them. All it takes is creative people sitting down. The matter of plot is all around us all the time. So I would think it's an embarrassment, frankly, to say I'm remaking a classic.
Well, it must gall you in particular because you're big on not going backwards and wanting to learn something new each time out, which you definitely don't do with tentpoles and sequels.
Yeah, well, it's all about money. It's all about the bottom line. It's all about people who have fallen out of love with movies because they're businessmen. It's my contention that most people who own studios would run Black Leader if they could get an opening weekend out of it.
Right. I think that's opening next weekend. Black Leader.
Black Leader.
As a veteran of a baptism of fire, what's your opinion about kind of schooling for screenwriters, or these structural textbooks, or kind of the science of the 3-act structure and all that?
I think if a person tries a few screenplays and they just fall apart in the middle, or people say it was great until this happened or that happened, then maybe they can read one of those books. But there are not 3 acts in a screenplay. There may be 7, there may be 2. I mean, originally there were 3 acts so people could go to the bathroom and start it in the theater.
Is that where that comes from?
Yeah, in the live theater, so that people could, relieve themselves and come back and sit down again. So, I forget the guy's name who wrote the first book about 3 acts in a screenplay.
Is it Sid? It's not.
Sid.
Oh, is it Sid Field?
Sid Field, who I know and love. We started out in documentaries together. He really caught on to something because he made everybody believe they could write a screenplay, whether they were a writer or not. And then along came the software that made it look like a screenplay.
Right.
So I think it's a huge mistake to do if you go in with formula, you come out with formula. The whole thrill of being a writer is to do a prototype every time out. And you can do it, something that nobody ever wrote before. If you confine yourself to 3 acts, you'll find yourself writing something you've seen already.
Well, you put it really well, because I always, I tell people, they ask me why there were so many bad screenplays or why there are so many screenplays. And, I just haven't been on the other side of the desk at a studio. You feel like it is a craft, but it's the one craft everybody thinks they can do. Like everybody can write a screenplay. There was one time where I thought I could write a screenplay because I read those books, but I hadn't made the connection to those books and the software. It feels like that kicked off a whole cottage industry.
And it'll shut you down creatively. Not only because it's the wrong way to approach the project of doing a screenplay, but it makes you think you know something when you don't. So I think it's been devastating. And now you go to a studio, they want to know what the 3 acts are before you've earned your way into it. They want to know what the beats of each act is. You cannot create scenes when you haven't walked the path. Each scene has to be earned, in my opinion, by the scene before it. And if I've tried to do it, which I refuse to now, and there are people who won't work with me because I won't bring in those 3 acts, it's only so that these guys who know nothing will be satisfied that they now know something. This is what's going to happen.
So do you outline for yourself, even if you don't turn in the outline to people?
I really don't. I just get a collection of scenes. One right after, I get a collection of the kinds of scenes that I want, but every scene is dependent on what the last line was in the scene before it. And I won't go into something trying to make it fit when it doesn't. I would find out when I first tried that I was using up all the information I thought was going to last for 45 minutes in the first 10 minutes. That, oh my God. And then I try to stretch it out because I sold it that way. A lot of people do that.
But you write one page or one scene follows the other.
What I do is sit down and try to imagine every situation I can find my characters in. And that will tell me when I need another character and who that character should be. And then they're in a stack. And if I can pin 3 or 4 of them together at the beginning, then I shuffle them. The rest of them start falling in. So I wind up with about 35 cards representing 35 scenes. It always works out that way by accident, 33, 35. There are no act breaks in there. There are no acts in there. It's just that every scene somehow accelerates or elevates or progresses from the one before it.
Did you feel like the business has changed a lot since when you first started to now?
Dramatically, dramatically. There were, I guess, 7 studios or something. There were no such things as independents. And the studios were run by people who loved movies and loved the people who made movies and had lofty ambitions and didn't need to have an opening weekend. Movies were not made to make hundreds of millions of dollars. None did until Jaws. That's what changed the business. Diamond mines, oil wells had big opening weekends, but they made $100,000 in a weekend. And when it was proved that a movie could make $2 million in a weekend, or 10, or now suddenly the businessmen came in. And once the businessmen came in and it turned into a business, we were dead. We were dead. We were just miners down there mining coal. They didn't care who died in the process or what the chunk looked like when it came up. It was saleable.
Now, can we discuss a scene that you've chosen as a particularly strong example of your work? And it's the heartbreaking scene in Lucas where Maggie, played by Carrie Green, kind of tells Lucas, played by Corey Haim, that she breaks his little 14-year-old heart because she tells him she could only be his friend.
I think my favorite scenes of, if you were to ask me what my 5 or 10 favorite, they would all come from Lucas. There was a certain feeling about what we were doing that it was unique, that it was truthful. It was very autobiographical. And I particularly love the scene because of the performance of the kids. And I love it because it had the essential piece of me and maybe you and maybe all of us when we were younger was...
Oh, I'm still having those moments. What do you mean? Oh, absolutely. Everyone has
likes you as a friend.
Have those moments, yeah.
Just likes you as a friend. It was sort of the nobility of the loser, and the confusion and the pain and the reconciliation that there's nothing he can do if she won't go there.
It's heartbreaking precisely because it's not a Hollywood moment. It's the opposite. It plays extremely real.
I think it's the stuff that makes people strong. Those refusals.
Were you conscious of that tone for the whole movie, that it played opposite the sugarcoating?
Well, we used to say, no sex, no drugs, no rock and roll, here's a free ticket. I mean, even in those days, John Hughes was already sort of objectifying teenagers, even though his films were much better than the films that are being made about teenagers now. But they were smoking pot and acting out. And I just wanted to do some kids who were dealing with the stuff of life, untainted by, chemicals and visions that had nothing to do with what was right in front of them.
Did you ever waffle, probably not on whether she was going to let him kiss her or not? It was in the DNA of the piece, probably not to let that happen.
Like I said, it was autobiographical. If I had gotten kissed, it would have been in there.
And you probably wouldn't have had the career you've had. Everything would have been different.
That's right. I'd have had a real career.
The whole bug motif, Lucas's obsession with bugs, really pays off here, and in that whole comparison he does of, insects with female choice. How did you hit on that? Did that come from your own experience in documentaries?
I was a geek. I was the kid who was mucking around in sewage canals with a net in my hand.
Was that how you arrived at the setting under the bridge? It was a setting that you had. Did you ever set under a bridge?
Yes, absolutely, I did. As a matter of fact, in a railroad yard, there I was catching crickets. But I kind of smelled bad because of all the places I went to collect animals. And I learned a lot about it. I was dyslexic. I couldn't accomplish anything in school. I literally failed just about everything. And as a favor, they gave me a diploma. Same thing in college. But the one thing I could read and devour, I don't know why, it's because I loved animals so much. I was really an expert on fish when I was a little kid, and insects as well, because that's all part of the food chain down there. You have to know what's hatching when and what kind of critters are eating it. But I remember once I drew a bunch of fish on a board because the teacher said, why don't you come in and teach the class about it? And it was all so natural to me, but I would draw what is called a gonopodium on a guppy. It amounts to a penis. And I brought that in, this little dorky kid in front of the classroom of cynics already. And here all and I point with a pointer. And this is the gonopodium, the guppy's penis. This penis doesn't actually penetrate the female's cloaca, and I had to stop. The kids were in a riotous
cracking up.
So I was that geek who wished, by the same token, to be popular.
Yeah, I had that experience in junior high school. I wrote erect on a chalkboard as part of a sentence, and I'm like, I don't get it. What's funny? I guess never having a first-hand experience with what I was writing on the board, but the class cracked up behind me. Is there a trick to writing with such naturalism and realism, or did it come organic with you just because you were drawing from your own life and the natural world?
I don't understand anything that doesn't feel real. I don't understand a stylistic movie or theater because it doesn't look real to me. It's got a box around it and they're shouting. I can't do style. I wish I could. I can only do what seems actual, so it wasn't ever a choice.